Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the March 16 meeting of the Chatham Finance Committee pursuant to Governor Baker's July 16, 2022 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. This meeting of the Chatham Finance Committee is being conducted in person and via remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 508-945-4410, 945-4410, enter conference ID 370-403-592, pound sign, 370-403-592, or hashtag. Or one may join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access, but we will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. In accordance with town policy, the public can speak to any issue on the agenda during the meeting when recognized by me, the chair. So today we're going to continue our work marching through the articles for the annual town meeting. We've got a couple of capital articles. We're going to vote on the Center for Active Living and any number of other things, including, most importantly, perhaps for right now, the school's budget and the school's assessment. Let me start with a roll call. Norma? Here. Kristen?
Here.
Tommy?
Here.
Barb?
Here.
And John is absentee. Tracy?
Here.
Joanne Sprague?
Here.
Andy? Here. Chairman's present. Okay, we have a quorum. Alex, school's assessment to begin, I believe.
Yes, thank you. We have 3 articles related to the Monomoy Regional School District. You've already heard the presentation from the Cape Cod Regional Technical High School and voted on that. But today we have the Monomoy Regional School District operating assessment as well as the regional agreement amendments. And I did send out sort of the one-pager on the amendments to the regional agreement. There's no change in the finances. It is basically getting rid of all the old language and inserting the Monomoy Regional School District. So I'll let the school business manager and the superintendent speak to any of those if you have any questions on that. I do have a copy of the total redlined and the clean version, but going through it, it's again just eliminating all the old language and having the updated language. And then we have the Monomoy Regional School District capital appropriation for technology Channel 22 equipment, which is coming from the PEG fund. So without that, I will have Scott and Michael give their presentation.
Terrific. Thank you, Alex. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Scott Carpenter, Superintendent, Monomoy Regional.
And Mike McMillan, School Business Manager.
So we'll do a
Hey,
little.
Mike, can you just take your mic and...
We'll do a little handing off back and forth as we go through the budget presentation. Before we jump into that, I'm happy to answer any questions, as Alex said, about the changes to the regional agreement. We last year when we brought the regional agreement forward for changes, it was focused just on things related to finance and the assessment, and had told both towns that we would come back to clean up the language. We didn't want to go sort of have it all blurred together. So last year was sort of the financial piece. This time is to take a document that actually nowhere in it refers to Monomoy at all, and really updates the language. And there are whole sections of the regional agreement that talk about how the two towns would come together to form a regional school district, and all of that is obsolete. So it's just removing things that are obsolete and inserting Monomoy Regional School Committee and things like that. And also there's, I think, about 10 places in the document that used to refer to selectmen, where the language is getting updated to say select boards, which would be where both towns have gone in the last decade, thankfully.
So why don't we start with that before going into the budget? Given that introduction, there is a fairly informative handout that Alex circulated in our package. Let me just open it up to any questions from the committee. It seems pretty straightforward. A lot of wordsmithing and updating of the document itself. But questions for Scott or Mike or Alex in respect of the changes, proposed changes? Norma, please.
Well, I have not read this. Obviously, I've just picked it up. But I have a question. How involved were any of the students in putting this package together? In terms of ideas, opinions, suggestions? Or
In
what?
the regional agreement or the budget process?
Either one, whichever one would most often affect the students on a daily basis.
So students weren't involved in the updates to the regional agreement. It was literally me going through the document that had been approved at town meeting last year and just doing a line out of things that were obsolete and just flagging anywhere where we should be changing it from what I think in the document it refers to as like the regional district committee and just inserting Monomoy Regional. So, so it was not, that didn't involve students. When it comes to developing the budget, we spend a lot of time in terms of getting feedback from principals on student needs, and there are, so at the base level, there are school councils that involve, that have students on them in each of the buildings, but particularly you can imagine at the high school level, there's much more feedback that's coming directly from the students into what's going behind the scenes in terms of, being the foundation of those budgets.
Could I ask one more
Norma, please.
question? Assuming that students are actively involved, wouldn't that perhaps influence the structure of the budget?
I'm not sure I understand the,
All right, if you have a panel of students from your high school, and they come in with suggestions, some of which you might find worthy, would that not impact your budget?
right, it would. So, so it would impact what the principals, so, so part of our process is the principals go and are working with their, with their teachers, staff, school councils, and their school improvement plans. So that feedback is coming in terms of what the building level needs are. So it does impact the budget that way. So the principals bring that forward as we build the budget, the budget that way.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions for Scott or Mike on the regionalization update? If not, I'll take a motion for adoption.
So moved.
Second.
And a second, thank you, Andy. Norma, in favor?
Abstain.
Thank you.
Do I
Kristen?
hear it?
Yes.
Tommy?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yep.
Joanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Chair votes in favor, so that's 701. All right, Scott, thank you for that. Let's go on to the budget if we could, please.
So I'm going to give an overview of the budget. I'm going to take you through some of the slides, and you also have hard copies there. Before we get started, though, on behalf of my wife and children, thank you for meeting at 1:30 in the afternoon rather than 6:30 at night. It's a real pleasure. I think it's the only public meeting that happens during the workday. So if it's an inconvenience to you, I'm very grateful. I'm going to go through a little background and provide some context to the budget, so just bear with me. But I want to give you a flavour of what's going on in the schools and why these funds and the work you do is so important to the students coming in through our doors. So we developed the budget, we kind of build up looking at the different policies and the different needs of the district and the students. We develop kind of needs-based assessment of what is happening in the schools, and that helps us make decisions about what expenditure we believe we'll need to make next year in these various categories. And then we look on the other side of things, how we're hoping to fund those needs and that expenditure. And that gets funded through the grants and state funding we have available, as well as, state aid. And then finally, the assessments, which come from the two towns. Now I'm going to go through kind of all of that. So the high level takeaway, student needs, we're seeing a lot of student needs coming from COVID. So we're definitely moved beyond the kind of direct medical needs that we saw related to COVID in the schools. And we're now facing kind of longer term academic and social emotional learning needs related to the gap we saw in schooling while schools were closed. And students, particularly in the lower grades, missed out on critical education that normally happens in kindergarten, or even preschool and kindergarten, first and second grade. Students missed out on some of that education, and that's really driven a lot of our student needs and some of the decisions we've made in relation to the budget. We're also seeing an increase in demand for special education services, again, especially in the lower grades. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, as I'm sure you're aware, both in your job for Chatham, but also in your personal lives, we're seeing a lot of the impact of inflation. Prices have gone up. We're seeing a lot of financial pressure from sort of macroeconomic issues, labour shortages, which is driving up both our employee contract costs, and also vendors we use, like HVAC vendors, are just more and more expensive, especially here on the Cape. And all that, sort of meeting those student needs and responding to those financial pressures is leading to this budget request of $44,382,000. So just shy of 1.6 million and 3.7%. And that breaks down to an increase for Harwich of 4.3%, but an increase for Chatham of $196,862 and 2.1%. So that's the quick version. I'm now going to do the longer version over the next 25 slides, but I'll go quickly. But before I do, just one of the things we wanted to stress is that the process of developing a budget is really a balance between the need to deliver high-quality educational programming while providing good stewardship of the taxpayers' dollars. So that kind of balance is something that comes up throughout our discussions with school committee and then when we present it to you. And I think our feeling, definitely driven by those student needs, is the need for high-quality educational program is more costly, and that's why our increase is slightly more than it's been in recent years. As we respond to those needs in terms of that educational programming, what we're trying to do, I just want to give you guys a sense of what it's like in the classroom, because what we're trying to provide is excellent classroom instruction. So that's the teacher standing in front of the students, making sure they have high-quality educational instructional materials in their hands to provide with the students. That we're also providing social, emotional learning and mental health supports, and kind of the thread through it all is equity. So we're providing the students what they need, where they need it. And in practice, that means we're investing in textbooks and curriculum materials. We have extensive professional development for students. Sorry, not for students. Everything's professional development for students. Also professional development for teachers and the staff. We have the after-school enrichment programs, so providing much more services for students and developing that relationship with students. We've added sections to our preschool because we have increased needs there for special education services and a whole lot of other things. And one of the last things just to highlight is our buildings. So I will talk about that a little bit, but we know we need continued investment in the upkeep and improvement of our facilities. So I just wanted to show this. Yes?
How would you describe or portray the portrait of a graduate?
So that's a great question.
So we have had a committee that has been working this year that is comprised of students and parents and teachers and community members that has been developing what school districts call a portrait of the graduate. And if you think conceptually this way, it's trying to define what is it as a community. What does Harwich and Chatham hope for our children? What will those graduates have in terms of skills and mindsets when they walk across the stage and get their diplomas? So thinking beyond just the reading, writing, and arithmetic, but do we want them to be critical thinkers? Do we want them to have empathy? So this group met throughout the fall and into the winter. Right now we have the work of that group is with a graphic designer, and we hope in the upcoming weeks to take the first draft of that vision that the group has come up with based on feedback. We had surveys that went into this in community meetings to share what our vision is. And then you could imagine that moving forward, we would want to make sure that, again, if we go back to empathy, if empathy is what we want to see in our graduates, what are we doing in kindergarten, in first grade, all the way up through senior year to develop empathy in students so that we're thoughtfully thinking about our program and our curriculum beyond just the academic content, that we're looking at all of these qualities that we want to see developed in the youth before they leave us and graduate, and make sure that we're thoughtfully putting those mindsets and building those mindsets and traits in children over the years that we have them. In a lot of school districts, the Portrait of the Graduate has been approached as a high school endeavor because it's now required, it's one of these requirements that high schools are going to need to go through for accreditation. As a superintendent, I look at this, that this is not a high school thing. So if we want empathy to be developed in children, we shouldn't be just saying, okay, starting in 8th grade, because we have an 8 through 12 high school, starting in 8th grade, we'll start working on empathy. We should be talking about how are we growing and developing that starting in preschool all the way up. So it'll have us define these characteristics, and then going back to our curriculum and starting to say, okay, above and beyond the academic content, here are these traits and where are we layering them into our program from the elementary grades all the way up through high school.
Barbara, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of mental health, it's disturbing to hear the numbers of kids who've committed suicide or have been thinking about it throughout the country. Do you feel confident that you are offering sufficient services to cover our students?
I do think we offer sufficient services, and I think that children and families are in crisis, and so it's one of those. I think we have been lucky to have in Harwich. They have had for years, for the entire time I've been here, and before that, a youth clinician for the town, Sheila House, that I think has been an additional resource that has been great, because the reality is we operate 180 days a year, and there's half of a year where families oftentimes need additional supports, and I think families are also challenged to find supports on the Cape. There's limitations on available counselors on the Cape. There's limitations on children who are really in crisis. There are limitations on number of beds that are available. So yes, we've been putting a lot of supports have been added in recent years, and we also know that this is it's an ongoing problem that that schools are facing, that that towns are facing, and that our whole community's facing.
Alex, please. I'm sorry, Barbara.
Yes, just to add to that, you might recall that 2 of the proposed positions within the budget are for licensed social workers, one for to focus on youth and the other to focus on adults. So those are included in the FY 2024 budget, and hopefully that will assist the schools in this necessary, where it's necessary.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Alex.
Scott, I'm reminded by the comments of Lester Thoreau when he was the dean at MIT's Sloan School of Management, that when he's asked why they don't teach ethics at Sloan, he said, by the time these kids get to us at 25, 6, 7 years old, if they don't have an ethical component and a perspective, then it's too late for us. So I applaud your starting at the younger ages in this. Can your office ensure that we get a copy of whatever the work product is of the Portrait of a Graduate when it's done, please?
Sure.
Yeah. I think we'd all enjoy seeing that, please. Thank you. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you very much. So then this slide, I realize there's a lot of chart bars here, but this is basically the total budget is a blue line since FY13, and it shows the percentage increase each year on year. So this year is definitely slightly higher than it's been in recent years. So it's not the highest since the district was formed, and that reflects those needs and those both the financial pressures and the student needs. And so I have this chart to try and just show the kind of relative impact of the sort of major items that are influencing our budget. So starting from the top, the red lines are reductions in the budget. So items where, for one reason or another, the costs impacting the district has gone down from FY23 into FY24. And then all the blue lines are the increases. So those two red lines are really why the budget's not a lot more, is the red lines. And the biggest one there is school choice tuition out reduction. So we have where students who live in Harwich or Chatham choose to attend public school districts other than Monomoy, then the state kind of charges us a fee that gets passed on to the receiving district. So in the last couple of years, we've seen the numbers of students in Chatham and Harwich going to the public school districts. That's been coming down. And so that's why we're now paying less through the state for those students. And so that's a big impact on our budget, and that's helping funding some of these other increases to instead of it being passed straight onto the towns. That and staffing turnover. So I think partly related to COVID, we've seen a lot of turnover in the last couple of years where people have retired or gone into other positions. And then when somebody, basically if they're retiring near the top of the pay scale, they're often replaced by somebody lower down, and that difference is a savings for the district. And so those two items combined have really had a big impact on what's presented today.
Mike, I think Norma's got another question, please.
Yes.
Concerning the students who transfer out of the district, have you made any study as to why they transfer out?
We talk with families when they choose out. There are some families that that elect for a charter school and believe that there's something at the charter school that's going to be better than what they're getting locally. I think there are some families or we know that there are some families that elect for, like Nauset. It's a slightly larger school, and they believe that their child might have a greater chance at being on a sports team that might get them into onto a Division I college sports team. So it's so there is some of the sports piece. There's some perceptions on the academics, but I think the good news here in the red bar is that there are more, increasingly more and more families that are staying with us. And when we came together as a district, there were a huge number of children from both Chatham and Harwich who were heading off, to Nauset or to charter schools, and we've seen that continue to come down and down and down as families see what we have to offer and are choosing to stay here. And I think in many ways it's a sign of pride in your school system. The bigger that bar is, that's more families that are seeing what we're offering here as the superior product. And the reality is these days, I think we're seeing just as many families from Nauset that are wanting to come here as we've seen families looking the other direction.
Andy, please.
Sort of staying somewhat in the same theme, I was looking briefly at school choice tuition in. How have you been faring on that?
So that has changed slightly, but that's not gone down at the same speed at which tuition out has gone down. So we're still seeing a lot of students coming into the district. And so that's still a big part of the funding. I think that comes on later on. I mean, it's gone down slightly, but it's still pretty much where it was. So that's good.
And I want to emphasize, there are different models, one could say, on how you look at school choice in. We have at Monomoy looked at school choice in as, let's come up with what we see are sort of class sizes that we are going to kind of try to run our buildings at. And if we have 16 children in the classroom and say, okay, we'll strive to have 18, though we'll look at and say, okay, we have 2 choice seats available. So, so those children would bring in $5,000 each. What we're not doing is a model where you take in all the applicants that you have and potentially put yourself in a situation where you're adding classrooms because you've taken in an entire classroom of children, because the reality is the $5,000 each doesn't pay for the teacher and the teaching assistant and the benefits, and so we're trying to approach school choice from a free seat model to offset and enhance the budget without having a negative impact on the budget.
Am I right in interpreting that in maybe a slightly different way, that you get two students who choose to come in? You, in essence, are reserving their 2 seats through the progression of high school.
Correct. So when you have a child who comes in, the way school choice works is they are allowed to stay with you through senior year. And most of the families enter at kindergarten. Yeah, so it's the kindergarten enrollment each year that we're looking at and trying to make sure that we have a group that will kind of progress through kindergarten up through 4th grade and then come together at the middle school.
Thank you.
Norma, please.
Comparison, how many students tuition in, and how many students by high school leave to another school?
So I can give you, so the number of students right now, well, as of the end of December, who were coming in was 249. That's throughout the district. And then the number leaving was 106.
Can you break that into grade levels?
I can.
Whether it's elementary, middle
Yes.
school, or high school?
I can, yes. I don't have it here, but I can get it. I'm going to have it on my computer.
So generally, we see some loss of students most of the districts around us don't accept school choice students at the elementary grade levels. So we see more choice out, or some of that choice out would happen in the fifth and 6th grades. And then you, again, may see some as you go from 8th grade to 9th grade. And then you have some that's happening, like you had the presentation from Superintendent Sanborn. 8th and 9th grade is where you see children that are heading off to to Cape Tech, which doesn't show up in our school choice numbers because it's a option for families and they have a separate assessment. So we're not fiscally responsible for them. We're fiscally responsible if the child is attending, let's say, Nauset or DY, or are attending a charter school. So those show up in our numbers, but not ones that go to Cape Tech.
All right, so then I was just going to talk a little bit about some of these blue lines. So the biggest blue line at the bottom of that is the increase related to salaries. So that makes sense. Our salaries are by far the biggest part of our budget. And so the contractual salary, cost of living increases and steps and lanes based on the employment contracts we have make up for around $800,000 worth of increases. We have some budget priority items, which we're going to give a bit more detail on, that are designed to meet some of those needs we're talking about. And then in areas of transportation and utilities and maintenance, that's driven by increases, inflation increases, staffing and contract service increases that we're seeing, across the country. But these are the areas where it's really hitting us. We have added this year some special education program staff who are like instructional assistants to support students directly. And those are really the biggest areas of increases that we've seen this going into next year's budget. Any questions on any of those? Because I know there's a lot of information in there. All right, excellent. So this is this chart just shows all our staffing as of October 1st. So we had, 2019, that was the highest amount of staff we had. It had kind of come down and leveled off towards FY23. We have increased since last year, mostly driven by some of those special education staff, but also the ESSER funding. We're going to talk a little bit more about ESSER in the coming slides. That is funding that we received from the federal government to help districts respond to the impact of COVID. So we are receiving over $2 million, and that has been used to hire staff. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides.
And as I mentioned, even the first year that I came here, we discussed as an administrative team and a school committee, sort of establishing sort of a line in the sand in terms of class sizes that we would shoot for in terms of developing and building budgets around. So, so we have been building budgets for the last 10 years around elementary class sizes that are 18 plus or minus 1 averaged across the building, 19 plus or minus 2 at the secondary level, which compared to off-Cape are rather surreal, very supportive class sizes. And then in developing the budget, there are a number of requests. As I mentioned, principals would come, to us and say, okay, here are the things that I would like to see enhancements in my building, and at the middle school, at the high school, at both elementary schools. Inevitably, there are some things on the list that aren't funded. Some years when we come before you, the list of things that aren't funded is a little bit larger. And this year, the school committee, after a very long, sometimes heated debate at their last meeting, settled on funding everything but some common area furniture at the high school. The high school is now 10 years old, and some of the soft seating in the library area is now has had 10 years of teenagers on it and starting to look like.
It's had 10 years of teenagers on it.
It's looking past its prime. The reality is that, Michael and I, frequently during budget cycles, after, as, the budget moves forward and goes to town meeting, and there are things, in savings that come along the way, and we have been able, in many of the past years, to go get many of the things that are on that unfunded list and make them happen. So I'm cautiously optimistic that as time moves on, that, something positive will happen in the budget, and even furniture, the furniture at the high school will take place. One of the things that never got funded and has been on the unfunded list for a number of years have been curriculum folks, district-wide curriculum folks for the district. So there are 2 district-wide curriculum positions that are in this budget. They would be supporting curriculum at the secondary level, one that would focus on ELA and humanities, the other that would be very math and STEM focused, to support teachers in their delivery of the content.
Scott, I think we've got a question from Joanne, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you for, on your new hires, showing us the average benefit cost. For the public at large, when they're voting on budgets, I think it's really fair for us to tell them what the actual salary will be when you add the salary plus the benefit cost. So thank you very much. I appreciate the information.
Yeah. So when we're adding, when you add a position, it's not just what's that, what are they getting paid, but what's the cost of the benefits? So what's that total compensation, which is very important for us when we're doing it. And I have to sometimes remind a principal, it's not just the salary that you see on the grid. There's a benefits cost, and what you see up here is that average benefit cost is just over $15,000 per employee. So what you'll see on this list of requests, and again, it's somewhat in response to what we're seeing out there and some of the challenges that that the pandemic and COVID has brought. There are children that are behind where they should be in their academics. So there's interventionists on the list. There are special education teachers that are added. So there's a special education position at Harwich, at Chatham. There's interventionists at Harwich and Chatham for when when children aren't succeeding in the classroom, getting extra support from the interventionist. So there's a little of everything in there, but this represents those wants that the principals brought to us after getting feedback on their budgetary process in each of the buildings. And then Michael mentioned there's the ESSER funding, and I wanted to make sure that we're talking about this because it is a little bit of an elephant in the room. If I was in your shoes as a FinCom, or if you think, about, for us, so we're actually going to start talking FY25, even though this is the FY24 budget, because we are carrying in this, there are staffing for 6 people who are covered under ESSER, with, roughly $600-some thousand worth of cost, that a year from now, that grant's going to be gone. And I have, told the Harwich board and want to share with your board, we have been thinking about this. We've been thinking about FY25 and beyond, because we've seen during the pandemic and beyond, we saw a need for a mental health coordinator. There are families, as Barbara mentioned, there are kids and families that have need. And just because the grant goes away at the end of this coming school year doesn't mean that need is going to go away. So, we have a strategy that I'll talk about here in the next slide. There's also a position that we have been carrying under this ESSER grant for an additional nurse. I think we're at the point now in the pandemic where we don't need that level of nursing. We can go back to pre-COVID nursing. There's one position that we're currently carrying this year that we're hoping is a little bit of a one-time, like a bump, and will be beyond. And that's we've had to add an additional preschool section. And so what's going on there is that during COVID, there were very young children, so infants, toddlers, that weren't getting identified as needing some additional supports for early intervention. Because of the pandemic, they weren't in preschools or daycares, or they weren't seeing a pediatrician as often. And oftentimes that's who is first flagging a child as needing this early intervention. So now the children are heading into age 3 and 4, and we have a bumper crop of children who are needing intervention supports as 3 and 4-year-olds. So it's like they have come out of the woodwork, and as superintendent, I'm like, how can we have slightly lower enrollment than when I got here 10 years ago, but we need significantly more early intervention at preschool? And it really, I think that this is hopefully a sort of a short-term thing where we're doing a little bit of catch-up with the preschool early interventions, because preschool, as we operate it as a school district, it's a special education preschool model. So you have an integrated preschool where half of the children have special needs and half of the children are peer models who are being educated together. So it does serve this special education purpose where kids who need it can get speech and language supports and physical therapy supports. So all of that happens behind the scenes in the preschool, and our hope is that this is sort of a catch-up bump that we're seeing. But again, we'll have to look beyond FY25 to see if this is just a blip, or did something tangibly change when it comes to special education needs of young children, moving beyond that. So how do we see funding these 6 positions that we're looking at as long-term? Again, we go back to those staff, to the staffing, 18 plus or minus 1, 19 plus or minus 2 levels that I was talking about. If we look at what's the enrollment and the way it's trending at the elementary level, and particularly at our middle school is about to lose a lot of enrollment because we have this sort of bubble of students. The biggest cohort that we have is currently at 8th grade, and there's like a bubble just behind them. That's about to leave the middle school, and much smaller class sizes are coming in behind them. So our middle school is about to lose a lot of enrollment And that positions us to keep us with supportive class sizes, but to use that staffing differently and so we see next year there's room within our staffing to go absorb 6 positions. We just have to kind of look at, and again, do a needs assessment as we're developing the budget. But on paper, based on where we see the enrollment going, we should be able to absorb the 6 positions and not be in a position of coming to the Finance Committee and Select Boards next year and saying, oh, we have $600,000 worth of staffing. Grant went away. Now we need to fund that. I do think that we can actually absorb it given the staffing and the enrollment shifts that we see coming heading into next year.
And Scott, I guess implicit in that assertion is the ability of you and your administration to move according to, I guess, the work rules, the unions and otherwise, move people between grades and
right, so,
school buildings and.
So in an ideal world, there will be teachers who retire and you don't fill those like a retired classroom teacher, but that gives us the capability to save the mental health coordinator that we want. Otherwise, you're in a situation where you're laying off the most junior classroom teacher to go, but there's the capacity there in the system to absorb 6 positions.
Well, I applaud you thinking about it early on. Pat, sure. You have to go up to the microphone, please.
I'm sorry. Just a quick
Okay,
question.
can you please identify yourself?
My name is Pat Burke. I'm the chairperson of the Chatham Council on Aging. I don't have any kids in the school system, but I have a question. In your last slide, I noticed that you had said you were going to bring your nursing numbers down to pre-COVID, which looked like 12 to me. Well, my question is,
Oh, that was the page number.
how many nurses do you have per school? And is it based on enrollment in the school?
Yeah.
Or acuity level of the children in the school?
It's a both and. So, Chatham Elementary, which is our smallest school, has 1 nurse. We also will find that certain cohorts, let's say, will have insulin-dependent diabetics that the nurse might need to spend more time with. So in buildings where you have, the acuity, increased acuity level will provide additional nursing. So we generally, in our larger buildings, which high school, Harwich Elementary are our 2 largest buildings, we see, sort of 2 nurses in those buildings. Nurse in the smaller buildings heading into next year would be middle school and Chatham Elementary School. And then we have a flex nursing position who, depending on need or time, can move between the buildings to where the greatest need is or to provide supports for field trips and things like that.
Do you have a psychologist in each school?
We do. We have clinicians. We have psychologists on staff in the district, and we also have school psychologists. So there's not necessarily 1 per building, but there's at least 1 clinician. There's actually more than 1 clinician in each building, if we think of it that way.
Norma, I think you had a question, please.
Yes, you spoke of the the special mental health needs in middle school, which we all know is such a terribly important age. Now, the programs that you are offering to help those students, are there any ancillary services that reach out to the parents, which is probably where that disability originated?
There are, so there are everything from work that our counselors will do with families, and then there's even a whole series that we have, an ongoing series that we have that we call Parent Universities, that happen after school hours. Some are run by school staff, and we actually have this wonderful resource in our towns. Charles Gruska is a Harwich retiree who had been very involved in schools in his past life, and is a wealth of information, and is doing a parent university on dealing with children's anxiety. Coming up, I believe, next week, and I think the week after that, he's doing a parent university for our families on, I think it deals with discipline and how to sort of effectively do discipline while I'm not losing the words for it, but sort of like in a socially, emotionally appropriate way.
Do you find at the end of these sessions greater participation of the families, and do you find an improvement in the students' performance?
I think it's probably family by family. I think there's some. I think there are some families that need even more support than that. So I think for some families, what we're offering is helpful, and I think there are other families that need a lot more services, and I think that's where even the clinician that Alex was talking about, that the town is looking at funding in the upcoming budget cycle, as well as what the Harwich Youth Counselor, that there are some families that need a lot more support. So, I also want to kind of just focus for a moment on some data, and the sort of the biggest ones on that budget, the budget priorities that were being funded are the curriculum roles. So I wanted to share with you at least where our thinking has been for the last several years and why we've seen this as a priority. So this is grades 3 through 8. And these are the MCAS, this is MCAS data on the number or the percentage of students that are meeting or exceeding expectations. And I would love to say that every child, that we have 100% of the students that are meeting or exceeding expectations. We don't. The reality is that before COVID, that was slightly over half were meeting or exceeding expectations, which I would like to say is we were doing well relative to the Cape, but as I said, we want to see these things increase. We're also concerned that since COVID, there's been a decline, and it's how do we help elevate after. So our want is to help teachers and support their classroom instruction so that we can bolster these and see more and more children meeting or exceeding in ELA and math. And it's not just grades 3 through 8. The next slide looks at the high school data.
Please, yep.
What's ELA?
English language arts, sorry. So English and math, think of it that way.
So that's everything except math.
Right. Well, not everything. It's literally sort of like the reading, writing, piece, and then math. And so the red bar is the math bar, the blue bar is the English bar. And so at our high school, we see those the percentages come up a little bit more, particularly in the ELA, or the English. But again, it's far less than what we'd want to see. You want to see these numbers, much nearer to 100, not at the 70% range. And then, just I put just some little anecdotal data from from a couple weeks ago, the high school principal met with the students in each grade level, just concerned about the number of Fs that students were getting. And, so when I, talk about, having curriculum people support teachers, a lot of this is, how can we support teachers at differentiating and giving the students that are in front of them what they need, what each individual needs to help lift that student's performance and ideally decrease the number of Fs, increase the meeting or exceeding. So I'll provide, for me, these are like not great news slides, but I'll provide an example of something great that's happened in the last couple years when it comes to elementary data. And we had our elementary principals do a presentation because we went a year ago and invested a lot of money in a new English program at the elementary level. And this is a really unique program because I think if I go back to my days in elementary school, all of the students in the class, we'd be reading the same book. And, all fine and dandy if everybody was at that level of that book. This English program, it's from the American Reading Company, and there are books at all these different levels, and every classroom has tons of books, all sorted by what level, so that every child can come into the classroom and find a book at their level, and the whole program is based on this sort of individualization, differentiation. So, so again, concerned about the scores. So a year ago at Harwich Elementary School and Chatham Elementary School, as we're coming out of the pandemic, a third of the children were way below grade level. Harwich Elementary, 40% at Chatham Elementary. Only a third of the children were at or above grade level in their reading coming out of the pandemic. If we go to where they are now, a year and a half later, Harwich Elementary School, we're pushing 70% are at or above grade level. And at Chatham Elementary School, we've doubled the number of children at or above grade level. So it is possible to go and invest in supports and help teachers bolster that differentiation and bolster their efficacy in the classroom and see these numbers change. And this is tremendous improvement. I mean, our teachers are knocking it out of the park. There are school districts that are now coming to our elementary schools to see what's happening in with this ELA performance, because this is what, when you see this type of improvement, this is what you're ideally striving for. So the conversations about these curriculum positions is to provide that coaching, support, guidance to lift numbers both in math and in English, and to focus across the grade levels. So we'll have kind of end with a good news data story. In terms of student-teacher ratios for our district, Monomoy sits right at kind of the middle of the Cape in terms of what our student-teacher ratios are. So we've got a student-teacher ratio of 10.1. I want to emphasize this isn't class size. So if you think about it, at an elementary school, maybe you'll have 17 children in a class, but you also have an art teacher. So if you take all those teachers in a building, and divided by the number of children, you'll come up with that student-teacher ratio. So we're middle of the Cape when it comes to student-teacher ratio. Monomoy is, like right at sort of the bottom of that top third in terms of, where you'd want to be for student-teacher ratio in the state. Where we lag is in the next slide, which is on administrator to teacher ratio. So we have always had a lean machine at Monomoy, and have an administrator ratio that's far leaner than the rest of the Cape. And, so this request for the 2 additional curriculum people moves us from the leanest outfit on the Cape to continuing to be lean, but at least provides the supports to help us, do what I would say is move that needle and to improve those outcomes for children. But if you take just the comparisons here, per child, so there's, or per administrator, there's 196 students per administrator currently at Monomoy compared to like Falmouth, which has 99 students per administrator. So it's kind of moving us closer to the Cape Pac.
Norma, please.
We seem to have glossed over pages 14 and 15, which I find not only damning, but very dangerous. I just don't understand, with the money that is poured into the system, why these results are so poor. Now, I don't know, is it the selection of the faculty? Is it the concern with money? Is it just not paying attention? But I just think that these children, many of them are being cheated. They are coming out as graduates, and I don't think they're very well prepared, some of them, to face the future meaningfully.
Yeah, and as I'm not saying that this is where we want to be. I'm just saying that, we want to, I want to see these elevated beyond, it's nice that the gap gets closed by high school at grade 10 and students have grade 11 and 12 to go and reach that, because you have to reach that proficiency level to get the diploma in Massachusetts, and all of our students do. But it would be nice to go and see them at that proficiency level from the first time they're tested in 3rd grade and beyond.
Thank you.
All right, we're in the home straight. Just a handful more slides till we're done.
No hurry.
Yeah. Capital and extraordinary maintenance items. So these are big sort of investment in the buildings and our capital needs. The biggest one is actually the bottom. That's our PA systems. So I should say this, we have a capital process. It starts in the summer, really, when we walk through all the buildings, identify all the needs, and we have a selection process that prioritizes needs based on a number of factors, but including health and safety. And so replacing our PA systems or upgrading our PA systems, that's the public announcement systems in each school, is top of the list because of the role that plays in the safety and security of students. Particularly the high schools, not so bad, but particularly the elementary schools and the middle school, the PA system cannot be heard clearly in all areas of the building. And so we want to rectify that as soon as possible. And so that's why that was being included in the budget. Likewise with the lighting at the middle school, the lighting outside, where the students are picked up, there's not great lighting. So especially in the winter and the fall, when kids are being picked up late in the evening, we want to make sure that that's well lit and students are visible to drivers. We also have a facilities pickup truck that's shared between middle school and Chatham Elementary School. We have one right now, but it's well past its useful life and is no longer roadworthy. So we want to replace that, and that helps manage our facilities and will hopefully help with some snow removal if we ever get snow again. That'll help keep the schools open so they can come to school. The one other item just to highlight on this list is the one that I've crossed off. So I kept it on here so we could talk about it. But we do have the plan in our capital plan to replace the roof at Chatham Elementary School and the roof at the middle school. We hope to do that using the Massachusetts School Building Authority grant program. They have 2 grant programs, one for building new schools and one for big maintenance projects like roofs. We had hoped to apply for that program for FY24, but they took the decision to close that program this year because of the increase in construction costs they're seeing. Their new school building program has cost so much more than they'd planned that they've closed the projects program and moved the funds over there. So hopefully this is a 1-year thing and we'll be back next year and applying again.
Mike, a question. In the select board package that was presented in February, you had a slide which called out aging building infrastructure beyond this.
Yep,
Excuse me,
this one?
that would be it.
All right, fantastic.
Perfect.
So do you want me to give you my spiel and then you can see if I've answered your question? But so as part of our process, what we have listed, basically what this table does is it lists all the kind of major building components of each building. And then we've assessed, what the expected useful life of that item is and what the current years old age is of that component at each school. So starting with boilers, you'd normally expect boilers to last around 20 years. So with good care, you can get them a bit longer than that. Currently at Chatham Elementary School, the boilers are 26 years old. We have one that's 20 years old at Harwich Elementary School and two that are 32 years old. The middle school, they're 26 years old, and at high school, 10 years old. So right now, we're actually okay right now. Everything's working well. The facilities team and the custodians do a great job of maintaining the building and these components. We have regular preventative maintenance done, so they're working well, but we know they're coming close to needing a replacement, and we don't want to be in a position where that happens in the middle of the year or in the middle of winter. So we have a plan. The PA systems are first this year, but coming soon next year will be the boilers at Harwich Elementary School, because they're already 32 years old, and then the rest of the priorities are based on those ages of those items. Yes.
Just, I guess, a question for Alex. Am I understanding correct that under the terms of the renegotiated regional agreement last year, that Chatham essentially owns everything under CES on that chart?
Yes, and as you recall, too, we expanded the rooms tax with 1% of that expanded tax to support the Chatham Elementary School, and that probably those funds could be used for either the capital or for the operating.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. This is something we called out in our report to the warrant. It's somewhat concerning. Obviously, we're gonna have to cover it, but it's one of the unknown unknowns that we've been referring to. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so up until now, we've been talking about kind of the expenditure expectations for next year. So over the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about how some of that is funded before we get to the assessments. So just the way the regional agreement works, some of our revenue comes off before the budget's set. So when you see that budget number, it's already taken account of these items in blue here, which includes revenue from school choice. So that comes back to our discussion earlier on. So we're still receiving $1.4 million, and expect to next year, in tuition from students who are coming into the district from outside. We also have circuit breaker funds. That's money we receive from the state to offset the costs of special education services to students that go above a certain threshold. We have some Title I and other grants which are set for particular purposes. We have $600,000 there. And in the last column is almost $700,000 from the ESSER funds. So those are those time-limited federal funds we're receiving. Next year is the last year. So I'll be much sadder with this slide next year because that bar won't even be there. So that's why we have that plan around staffing for how we're going to fill that hole in years to come. But overall, this is up slightly from last year. Any questions? All right, so then this revenue is actually, so after the budget's set, before we calculate assessments, we take all this revenue off of the total. And the biggest part of this is our Chapter 70 fund money that comes from the state at $4.1 and a bit million. That was a little less than we were hoping for a number of reasons, but that's the biggest offset. And then excess and deficiency, so that's strictly speaking not revenue, but that's money a bit like the town's free cash. It's money that we have left at the end of the year, and we use that to offset future budgets. So the district's in a good position with our excess and deficiency, and anything of the excess and deficiency, the way the rules work from the state, anything of excess and deficiency that's more than 5% of our budget has to be used to offset the future budget. So that would be about $300,000 next year, but we're obviously using a lot, using significantly more of it to reduce the assessments. As a regional district, we receive funds from the state to offset the cost of transportation. and that is $825,000. And then the one other item I just wanted to highlight is that last column on the right, that other district revenue. So that includes interest from the funds we have in our bank accounts. And our treasurer has been, especially right now, our treasurer has been more active in ensuring that money gets the best interest or return that we can. So we've been using that with treasury bonds because the return on those have been so high. So, you know, just because with the way the money comes in and out, we tend to have a balance. That excess and deficiency fund is our balance. And so we're able to, plan treasury bonds with that and receive the interest back. So in the last couple of years, that number has been about $14,000, $15,000. For next year, it's $200,000. So that is also helping to offset the assessments.
Norma, please.
On the previous page, can you tell me the difference in the need for separating it concerning special education funds from circuit breaker and from grants?
Yes, thank you. So circuit breaker is state funding for special education costs. The special education grants, the main one there is the IDEA grant from the federal government, which provides an entitlement grant to all districts to help fund their special education costs. So it's really the source and the process. So for the state grant, we just report our expenditure on students for special education in 1 year, and then we receive a reimbursement for that the following year. That's the circuit breaker funds. The federal grant, we fill in an application to the federal government every year, and they give us a certain amount based on their calculations.
But this paper says that's a state reimbursement.
So there are state and federal funding for specific purposes. So federal special education and Title I grants. So we do receive a couple of other small state grants for different things that are reflected in here, but it's not large amounts. So circuit breaker is like a reimbursement where we just tell the state how much we spent and they give us a portion of that back. Grants are like we fill in an application and they determine how much we should receive back based on that application.
Okay, Barbara, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it looks as if the person who was purchasing bonds for you did a better job than Silicon Valley banks.
I can assure you none of our money is in that bank.
All right, on that cheery note, let's go to the total budget.
All right, so just recap where we've got to. So we calculated our total budget of $44,282,000. Our total general fund revenue and state aid that comes off of that is $6.2 million, which leaves $38,179,000 to be split between the two towns. So one of the primary drivers, not only one, especially since we changed the regional agreement, but one of the primary drivers for that split is foundation enrollment, and it's a 3-year average of foundation enrollment of the two towns that determines how a lot of the money is split up. So I included this chart just so people can see how it's changed in recent years and how that impacts the 3-year average. So the top table just has the enrollment year, the number of students at Harwich, and the percentage of the foundation enrollment is at Harwich, and then the Chatham number and Chatham percentage, and then how much of foundation enrollment has swung from Chatham to Harwich each year. So you can see actually back in 2022, it's actually swung the other way. So Chatham's share of foundation enrollment actually went up by over 1%. But even that wasn't enough to kind of shift the 3-year average, which is listed below. So if you look at 2024, we're still seeing a 0.29% shift from in the share of enrollment, foundation enrollment from Chatham to Harwich. So, and this is how the assessment breaks down. So the top line is the local minimum contribution. So the way the regional agreement works, the first step in determining how much each town has to pay is based on the minimum local contribution, which is a number that the state determines and which determines each town's minimum contribution towards education. So actually,
Yes, Joanne, please.
Then could you please tell us what the minimum contribution is based on?
so yes, so the minimum contribution is based on a number of things, including foundation enrollment and the state, the town, the value of property in the town, and income in the town, the state terms.
Yes, thank,
And so both towns actually went up last year, partly because those numbers went up significantly for both towns. And so the portion of the budget that's determined by the minimum law contribution went up. And then after that's been assessed to each town, all the costs, all the operating costs above the local minimum contribution is split up based on the formula in the regional agreement. The big change that we made last year is the first thing that each town pays for its own elementary school. And so that's reflected in this number on the second line. So you see $4.4 million for Chatham there, which actually is a reduction. And it's only a reduction because the local minimum contribution went up so much. That's now a much bigger share of how the calculation is done. Transportation has gone up, and then that comes back to my point earlier on about the inflation, particularly the salaries. We've had to increase salaries as we've had more and more competition for bus drivers and fewer people out there who want to drive buses, and the cost of fuel, which has almost doubled in the last few years. And then capital, so capital for Chatham actually went down, and the reason for that is last year we had in the budget the plan to do the Chatham Elementary School, which would have been 100% in the Chatham assessment. But that was taken out because we didn't get into the programme. So that was taken out of your assessment, and it was replaced by items which are district-wide and shared. So essentially, which you pay like a quarter of. So we took out an item which you paid 100% for and replaced it with items which you pay a quarter of. And that's why you see your overall assessment for capital actually went down. And then debt, and the debt is the debt on the high school, and that's paid based on a debt schedule for that investment, and it goes down each year, the way the debt schedule works. And so that comes out a total assessment of $9.7 million, just shy of a $200,000 increase in Chatham's assessment.
Thank you, Mike. Andy, question, please?
Question and also a comment. Who knew that we were that interested in every detail of how the school operated? We really should be going to the school council meetings in the school rather than, getting into such detail here. But I appreciate the presentation. It's explained to me at least somewhat the consternation that apparently is taking place in Harwich, all right, over and maybe a renegotiation of the deal between ourselves for the regional school district. I'm just going to leave that aside for now. Time is short. I would like to move that we recommend approval of the school budget, Monomoy Regional School District budget, as in Article 12, $9,710,449.
Is there a second to such motion? Tracy's got a second. Any further comments, questions?
yes, Mr. Chairman.
Joanne?
In your population, your high school has a capacity of how many?
So the high school was built for 700, and we would imagine that next year it will be hovering right at about 700, maybe a few students over. So we will see the high school go slightly above 700 for about the next 2 to 3 years, and then because they're smaller cohorts behind it, we'll see the high school start to come down and dip down beneath that 700. But I will not be coming before you saying we need to build a new wing on the high school.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got two quick questions, unless anybody else on the committee does. How does foundation enrollment, I guess I'm trying to figure out the mechanics of the Chatham owning its own elementary school now.
Yep.
Do the number of kids in the elementary school affect the calculation on page 24?
So
And then who ultimately pays whatever the allocated cost is? Are we getting bills from Chatham Elementary School that go straight to our general ledger that we just pay and you guys don't even think about that anymore?
No.
How does it
So it's-
mechanically work?
mechanically, it's all just part of the assessment. So essentially, the number you agree right now, which includes the costs of Chatham Elementary School, So Alex will just transfer those funds to us every month. She does, there's a payment schedule and we just receive those funds. We pay all the bills. We are still responsible for Chatham Elementary School. We pay for all the bills. We manage everything that's going on in there. It's just when we're calculating the assessment, that's how we calculate your portion of the assessment.
Okay.
So in terms of the foundation enrollment, if you want it, a sort of more in-depth session on the assessment in Chapter 70 would be welcome, but the foundation enrollment affects the assessment in a number of different ways. It affects minimum local contribution, the way the state calculates it. It affects the capital and the debt. And then within the operating costs for the rest of the building, so you just pay whatever the elementary school costs, you pay it. If there's one kid there, you pay all those costs. If there's 100 kids, you pay all the costs.
Yep, understood.
But so above that, then it depends on enrollment. We actually use the enrollment of the middle school and above to calculate the rest of the district costs,
all right.
although it gets more complicated.
All right, no, that's helpful. I was curious if that was the general mechanic. Okay, we've got a motion and a second to foot $9.710449 million for the assessment for Monomoy Regional School District, excuse me. Norma, in favor?
No.
Kristen?
Yes.
Tommy?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yes.
Joanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And the chair is in favor. That's 7-1, gentlemen, and Alex, thank you. And now I think we go to a $13,114.21 allocation out of a PEG fund for microphones and cameras, tripods, and drones. If I'm not mistaken.
Okay, I can probably address this. This is a request for equipment for Channel 22 at the Monomoy Regional School. And again, the total for the equipment is $55,948. So, and that will be split according to the regional agreement for the percentage for capital. So for Chatham, that would be 23.44% paid by Chatham for a cost of $13,114.21. And that's coming from the cable access funds that are reserved for educational purposes. So that,
Our very robust
yes.
cable access educational fund. Okay, thank you, Alex. $113,114.21 is our motion. Barbara has a question.
I'm just wondering how the schools use these drones.
So I think these days, yeah, it's,
Cribia.
these days, more and more, I think it's trying to go have children who are learning news and TV production to actually have them use real tools that, we're seeing used in TV production, out there in the real world, and drone technology with the cameras in the drones is just more and more commonplace in, whatever show you're watching or whatever news program.
Well, they're much cheaper than 32 million, so
Yeah.
I'll move that.
All right, we have a
Mr.
motion and
Chair-
a second.
Mr. Chair,
Oh,
one
Joanne,
quick
please.
question.
Hold on, I'm
Would
trying to
you-
get a second, please.
Okay.
Second. Tracy. Any comments or questions? Joanne?
Please repeat the amount of money on this particular article. I have $13,114.
And 21 cents.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further comments or questions? Norma? Kristen?
Yes.
Tommy?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yes.
Joanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Aye.
Chairs in favor, 8-0. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. Always insightful.
Thank you for your time.
Excellent.
Some interesting issues you guys are wrestling with, and we'll certainly look forward to seeing you back here next year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. I'm going to call an audible on the agenda, only because we have our harbor master who's been sitting patiently here for some time, and I'd like to see if, Stuart, we can get you to pop up and see if we can have a chat about the surf-capable boat, after which we'll revert back to terminal building easements and tree height, et cetera. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. So we're back before you.
And who are you, just for everybody in the audience? We know
Oh,
who you
sure. Stuart Smith, Harbor Master. To my left is Jason Holm, the Deputy Harbor Master.
Terrific. Thank you, gentlemen.
Sure. Good afternoon. We're here, as I guess, as a follow-up meeting to to your last meeting you had with Jason, I was at a project meeting with the Fish Pier that day, as a result of the Board of Selectmen's or Select Board's endorsement of the article for the surf-capable vessel. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Are you folks have my memo that I?
We got the memo this morning. I think Jason was kind enough to give us a presentation a month or so ago. Do we want to get any kind of facts refresher on any of this? Andy, please. So, and then I'll turn to you, Alex. Oh, let's start with Alex, alphabetically.
Oh, okay, just very quickly, the request is for $250,000, which would be a matching grant funds to get the boat. Again, I believe it's a federal grant availability. So this would be, again, a matching grant of $250,000. And the Select Board did review this at their meeting, I believe, last week. And they also talked about some of the policy issues regarding it. And just for everyone's information, the Select Board voted 3 in favor and 2 opposed to support this.
Thank you, Alex. Andy, question?
Alex, have you been through the proposed operating costs yet? I mean, I see what's written in this, but I'm thinking that to take a boat, even if it's new, and to operate it for a bunch of training evolutions, it's got to cost more than $8,000 a year. It probably costs $8,000 just to put it on a trailer.
Yeah, I have not run those numbers yet, to be
Okay.
honest.
All right. Stuart, is that something that you have? Have you
So,
done that?
No, we haven't done any of that. We were waiting for we didn't really spend a whole lot of time on that aspect of the budget until the Select Board voted to actually move forward with it. So that's something that they had asked that we work on,
Okay.
getting some more details on. It's, the boat would be new.
Right.
The engines and hull would be warrantied. So we don't expect the boat it's not a patrol boat, so we're not going to be putting a tremendous amount of hours on the vessel. It's jet-driven, not propeller-driven. So we expect at least while it's new, that the operating, or at least the maintenance costs won't be very high. The operating costs will be namely fuel and oil changes. The existing staff will operate the vessel and will be augmented like we augment currently our current staff using either seasonal or fire department personnel.
In my understanding from what I saw of the Select Board's meeting, at least part of the argument for going forward was that because this is a grant match, and I believe it was you said that the grant is on perhaps a cycle that might take as much as a year to determine whether or not we've been awarded it?
It could.
Okay.
It's not a short process.
Right, right. And my impression is that influenced some members of the Select Board to say, gee, we approve this, we get into the mix for the grant, see if we get it. If we get it, then we'll tackle it, the issues of the policies and all the rest of it. I have to admit, I'm not really comfortable with that. I understand the logic of approaching a grant like that, but presumably the grant funders are going to want to know that we are in favor of it and, have put up earnest money as part of the match. But I think there's still a lot of holes, right, that the Select Board has yet to fill in terms of the policies.
All right. Thank you, Andy. Other comments, observations? Barbara, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Stuart has laid out a very operational plan here. I think the talent and expertise that we have in KZ and our assistant deputy shows that we are ready to put this boat into operation. And I can't imagine anything more terrifying than being out on the water in distress and knowing that the Coast Guard is not coming out to help you. So I am for this.
Thank you, Barbara. Joanne, please.
Barbara said exactly what I was going to say, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Further comments, questions, observations? Stuart and Jason, I guess one question I have is sort of thinking about this mechanically. Again, I I'm kind of on the, I think we should develop policy and do a kind of an operating cost review, et cetera, really to see what we're getting into here. I did have an opportunity to speak with the fire chief about the prospect of staffing this from his perspective. I think it's probably fair to say that this community had a staffing plan for the fire department that's about 10 or 11 years old that we just successfully completed last year. I guess I would characterize my takeaway from the conversation was he wasn't thinking that he had a lot of men to spare. I've got a scanner that the former fire chief was kind enough to provide me, and listening to the number of times a day that they're calling back firefighters from off-duty to try to staff the department, staff the house, is remarkable, to me at least, especially in the summer. And I guess my concern is how really are we going to staff these things? Are we going to put part-time harbor masters on a surf boat and send them out into a 10 feet breaking sea to try to rescue people? And there's a part of it I'm having a really hard time connecting with. I admire the mission. I applaud the report. I think it's well thought, to Barbara's point. But I'm just having a hard time making all the synapses connect on this one.
Sure. Well, just to, I didn't read all the newspaper articles about the last meeting, but this department, we're already staffed for a 24/7, 365-day response. That is our current staffing. We do that because throughout the year and throughout the day, and obviously most namely in the late spring, summer, and most of the fall is when we get our calls. The surf calls tend to, and the heavy weather calls tend to arrive in the fall, not during the height of the season, because we don't have easterlies then, typically. The easterlies come in the fall and the winter. We have boat traffic, obviously, year-round, but less in the winter.
Yep.
So as far as the staffing is concerned, we're staffed up during the summer and most of the fall. And the fire department is very busy during the summer and presumably into the fall.
Right.
But we already use those personnel. If we're going to a call that's going to involve a boat fire, for an example, or a medical call, we are already using the fire department. That is not going to increase by any measurable amount. So whatever service they're providing to us currently is what they'll continue to serve, we'll continue to utilize them for. We have, as you probably have noticed, gotten away from using students for our boat operators. The students go back to school early. They come less prepared, and just simply because they just don't have the experience on these boats. We've been utilizing people with more experience. We have a lot of very capable mariners in this community that, if they were trained properly, could operate this boat.
Okay.
And I mean part-time, seasonal type folks like we have now. So I can go into more detail with the staffing if Jason can follow up too.
I just wanted to kind of illustrate where the training and skill sets come from. So the blueprint that this is based off of is obviously from the Coast Guard, because they're the experts with it. I've mentioned, I didn't really get to present you guys this full case last time because I wasn't sure that this was the appropriate time to talk about it or if we were coming back. So I apologize for leaving some of these gaps last time that we spoke.
No need, please.
But the operator portion is really where the heavy amount of training comes. We already have existing seasoned boat operators. This is merely honing a skill. They already know how to tow. They know how to pick up men out of the water, men or women. They know how to tow or de-water. They know how to perform search patterns. So these core skill sets, they understand how to work the deck as a crew. They understand how to work them as an operator. The difference is in a more dynamic atmosphere, breaking surf, wind, and a different boat type to start with. So really, our existing boat operators here, just fine-tuning that craft and introducing them to new concepts and operating is really where it lies. And it's really, everyone seems to be hung up on the surf boat. This is just a different boat, and it's just a different dynamic. So, you can teach somebody how to drive a boat on a lake or in high current. it's really not that much different. I mean, it is a specialized skill set, and I don't mean to undersell that in the slightest, but it is just a different skill set. The crew in the Coast Guard, there is no specialized training from a multi-mission station to a heavy weather station to a surf station for the crew and engineer. What they do learn is just different communications and a few different things on the boat, such as being belted in and how to go D-ring to D-ring. So as far as crewing that boat, there's not a lot that goes into that. It's more just some ride-along, some familiarization with the boat, and more or less terminology on how to call out different things. The real, the real training just goes into the classroom or studying, and then seeing it in person. So, those two together is really the crux of it. But from the crew standpoint, as Stuart alluded, we're going to continue doing the same things that we're doing. It's just a matter of, exposing them to that condition. And when you go out, explaining what a sloughing brake is, what a plunging brake is, and things of that nature.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
When we spoke to the board and wrote them different correspondence, and the Board of Selectmen, Select Board, that'll take me a while, communicating with the Coast Guard over a number of years, the need is obvious because the Coast Guard is no longer doing that responsibility that we think they're responsible for doing. They're not doing that. When they downgraded from a surf station, that was bad enough, okay? It got the town's attention. But 18 months later, they downgraded from a surf station to a heavy weather station, and then to a multi-mission station. It's almost unconscionable. I've never even heard of that happening so quickly. So it's not only a matter of not being able to operate in the surf, they don't operate in heavy weather, which by their boat operational definitions are no surf and nothing over 30 knots. Now, the manufacturer says, no, we think the boat can operate in 8-foot surf and 50 knots. The Coast Guard downgraded it with their own regulations. So it's not only surf issues and the inlets, it's this heavy weather category that is really distressing. In the boats we have now, you can think of it, we operate in more than 30 knots, not pleasantly, but we do because we have to. Right. And we're operating boats that are half the size of what they're operating. So, we have a very good officer in charge at Station Chatham currently. We have a good crew. We just got some bad decisions being made up the chain.
Yep. Jason, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to state that with these calls, we're going to be responding. It's just a matter of whether we're going to be able to do anything. And that's kind of the dilemma. If we get a call that, there's a boat capsized in the bar, we're going to go in the existing boats that we have now. We just may not be able to do anything. We're going to have to sit there and watch. So, part of this, as Stuart alluded, is just identifying a gap. But, we'll continue to respond. It's just a matter of whether we're going to be able to do anything once we get there.
Thank you. And insofar as the rescue capability, understand kind of the mariner capability of getting the boat there, getting the boat on site. In terms of the rescue capabilities, Stuart or Jason, of your existing crew, your sort of temporary crews in the summer, do you see any operational challenges relative to their capability of what they would find when they get into the surf, in a surf-type rescue?
Yeah, there are very capable operators that we have now that are either seasonal and/or part-time, meaning they go further into the fall, that will have to be up-trained into, these types of conditions that we potentially could face. They're used to smaller conditions, but now we will have to familiarize them with these types of conditions.
But I'm also, I guess, thinking about the rescue component, whether it's CPR, whether it's, what they will find out there.
We're already trained in first aid CPR, and the full-time harbor masters are advanced first responder trained.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. Norma, please.
I think that considering our location and the history of that area, it would be folly not to pay attention to what these men have said. There have been some serious rescues. Now, granted, there were not a lot of them, thank God for that, But when a rescue is needed, you need people with equipment, knowledge, and experience. So I think to ignore this would be folly, and I do hope that it passes very quickly and with a lot of support.
Okay, Andy, please. Oh, tie goes to Joanne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason I really like this article is that Chatham, it gives us a chance to take on our own shoulders the public safety of our citizens or anyone who uses the waters around us and not have to depend on the largesse or the response of the federal government. So I think this is a great idea, and I do hope we go forward with it.
Andy, please.
Okay, although, of course, this grant is being awarded by some government, probably the federal.
But that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, if we're getting into this, what kind of boat are we talking about? Is it one of the 42 safes or something? I mean,
If you, yes, it is. If you can envision the 42s, by the way, you can feel kind of the frustration in my voice. It's with the Coast Guard. It's not with any group in this community. They're sitting on blocks at Otis, and that is really disappointing. In any event, it's the same manufacturer, only the boat is 36 feet. It's not 42. It's smaller.
Is there any self-righting capability?
So the short answer is yes. That is an option in the specifications. So we're going to talk further with the manufacturer about that as to, but currently, yes, that's part of our program.
Any indication from the manufacturer in the 36-foot boat what sort of operating conditions it can endure? Surf height, wave speeds, wind speeds?
Right. Well, we are saying to Safe Boat, that's who the manufacturer is, that what our parameters are that we want that boat to operate in. It will not reach the parameters of the 44 and the 42. It'll be something less than that. But it'll be surf conditions, and it will be certainly in excess of 30 knots of wind.
That's going to be water jet. It will be inboard diesel, gas?
Yes. Yep, inboard diesels.
Diesel, okay.
You can specify the engines. I'm a Cummins person, so that's where I'll probably lean.
Okay. So, I mean, it will have, a certain amount of fuel consumption pattern. It's going to go into the operating cost for this.
Yes, it will.
Right. One of the issues that the Coasties had referred to in the 42s was a problem, they said, in shallow enough conditions, the water jet intake was sucking in too much debris, sand, and other things.
Yes. It's interestingly enough that the replacement boat draws a foot more water than those boats, but Casey can answer.
I operated jet drive surf boats out of here for 7 years. I mean, if you have a dual-plex strainer, you shift the strainer over and empty. I mean, that's just, even with the 44s, that's how we operated. So I'm not sure what their situation was at the time. I was here as the officer in charge when they had the 42s after the guy got relieved in 2011, and I don't recall having any issues in my time here with them.
Okay. It still blows my mind that the Coast Guard's giving up on this.
Yeah, it
That's just
blows
crazy.
ours.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Stuart, we had a brief chat about this the other day. Are there any concerns within your group about a prospective Coast Guard response to, I mean, they, as we discussed, they kind of have abdicated this mission in favor of things in the far away. Is there any concern about a response from the Coast Guard if we were to take this mission on, in terms of the prospect of them downsizing or eliminating the station and putting a light sensor on Chatham Light and locking the doors?
Well, they've already given up the mission, so I don't see any concern on their part because other than air assets, they're not responding to surf and heavy weather. So in some of these correspondence with the Select Board and the Coast Guard, they've committed to their presence here in Chatham. Well,
If I could draw a parallel
Yeah, please, Jason.
example, we have a lot of shallow water in Chatham. We, as the Harbor Master's Office, respond to the large majority of marine incidents in shallow water because the Coast Guard doesn't possess the assets to do it, or their policy prohibits them from doing so. So they do have a new shallow water boat. I'm not sure what they rated it for, but this is kind of the same parallel, and that now they've abandoned the surf and heavy weather mission. So much like the shallow water response, it's just something that they're unable to do now. So I just wanted to point that out as another kind of mission area that they don't really respond to anymore. And there's a lot of factors to it, and I love the Coast Guard. I'm retired, but there's a lot of frustration sometimes with things such as NAF standards and operational depths and drafts, and that they'll allow them to go into to where other assets are able to, so.
Thank you. Nora, please.
Oh, this may be not answerable here, but based on what you said, what does the Coast Guard say is their mission in Chatham? If they're not going to respond to so many things that are necessary, why are they here?
Yes, that's a very good question. Frighteningly, I don't know what mission they have left here. Another department in the Coast Guard maintains the lighthouse. So that's a good question. As I've often told them in meetings, you've given up the one job we need you for, and that is to look over Chatham Inlet's Chatham Bar. And your response now is you're going to send a helicopter. Well, let's hope that helicopter happens to be flying over the east side of the Cape, because otherwise it's 40 minutes all day long just to get the helicopter here, and that's if the weather conditions allow. We happen to live in a very foggy place, and they don't tend to like to operate in fog. Those helicopters, there's 3 of them, operate from the Canadian Maine border all the way down to New Jersey. That helicopter could be anywhere in that area. But years ago, they had 4 helicopters. Now they have 3. So that's part of their response plan. The other response plan is, from a boat standpoint, well, we're going to respond to, I don't know if this still stands, but with the last CO it did, and that is we're going to respond to the Chatham Fish Pier if there's an incident on the inlets, and if it's an incoming tide and there's surf, we're going to wait until the person comes in. We're going to get them. That's not a plan. That's a hope. The other, if it's an outgoing tide, this doesn't get better. If it's an outgoing tide, we're going to leave from Stage Harbor, we're going to respond around Monomoy Point, and we're going to catch them as they go out into the ocean. That's a real lousy plan. That's not a plan. That's an excuse. That's an explanation. So frankly, we shouldn't be here, but we are, and it's frustrating.
As Stuart mentioned, the new officer in charge is a good sort. And I do feel that they're going to respond to incidents that they're allowed to respond to, that's within their operational capabilities. But the Coast Guard mission as a whole seems to have molded a little bit more towards Homeland Security, active shooter incidents on ferries, and that's from the Coast Guard's mouth. They still perform search and rescue and maritime law enforcement, but they seem to kind of be focused.
And I want to get too far afield, but to give you a little bit of background, if you read about these changes in the Coast Guard, you'll notice significant amount of resources going to the Western Pacific. Before the war, they were in the Black Sea. They're in the Mediterranean. They're off of South America. And there are a lot of assets in the East, South China Sea, and the Western Pacific, where we didn't have, where the Coast Guard didn't have that to the level we have now. So there's a lot of resources going elsewhere.
9/11 changed everything in that regard, I think.
Yes,
As the
considerably.
precipitator.
Yeah.
Further questions? I guess I've got 2. One is, so if this, I appreciate the fact that it could take some number of months to learn whether this is successful, which would then trigger presumably some action by the select board in respect of this whole thing. Can I just ask what your operational plan is between now and whenever that may be, in terms of policy, in terms of budgeting, in terms of operational costs, in terms of his, I think you've admitted, this isn't wholly fleshed out yet.
Correct.
So what's the plan to get this fleshed out? So if this happens, we're ready to go and we've considered all the implications of this thing, et cetera. That's, I guess, what I would like to understand first.
Sure, and if, just to follow up a little bit, if the select board decides, let's say we get a successful grant, we go back to the select board and then they ultimately make a decision of whether they would like to move forward with it, and we do, it's at least, and probably 12 to 18 months to get the boat built. It's not something on the lot. In the meantime, we're going to respond as we've always responded. We have a slightly upgraded vessel for the fish pier, and we and our other boat operators will respond according to our SOPs, and the boat operator and ourselves will ultimately make the decision once we get on scene what the conditions are, what the threat is, the casualty, and how we're going to deal with that. Sometimes those conditions exist and we just go. We just go into the surf, or we go into the bar and we just deal with the issue and, sweep up afterwards, so to speak. Sometimes, because the conditions are greater, maybe there's something over 4 or 5 foot surf, then we have to pause, make a decision as to, okay, what are the circumstances here? What are we dealing with? How much of a threat is are the people in? And we'll go from there. As an example, we responded to a boat that was aground in surf conditions, anchored, but disabled, in the North Inlet. And we responded, we got on scene, and communicated with the Coast Guard. They were en route from Stage Harbor, so we got to wait for that. That's going to take a while. And we were in communication. This doesn't always happen, but we were in communication with the boat that was in distress. So we had a conversation saying, okay, are you good now? We will come in and get you. But if you're good, we're going to wait for the Coast Guard asset. It's a bigger boat, right? And it was the 42 surf boat. It wasn't the ones we have now. And ultimately, the Coast Guard got on scene, put a tow line on the boat, towed it through the surf. We stood by in case we had to get in there because things deteriorated before the Coast Guard arrived. Fortunately, it didn't. We had a successful mission, but that's the type of, every case is different.
Understood. Okay, that's helpful. And my last question, this may be somewhat speculative, but it's my understanding that the select board, in its wisdom last week, decided against offering incremental berthing space in Stage Harbor to the Coast Guard. Do you have any concerns that, again, the combination of us undertaking this mission that notionally they should be responsible for, but clearly have elected to pursue other matters further away, but Chatham's seemingly, I'll reserve my characterization, but the decision by the select board to not offer incremental berthing rates to the Coast Guard in Stage Harbor, is that just setting us up for a recipe for disaster with further relations with the Coast Guard? That's my concern, is that these guys just say enough of this.
Well, I mean, we put that notion forward a number of years ago. It kind of got lost in COVID land, but we resurrected it, brought it back before the board.
That notion being incremental berthing?
Yeah, what the chairperson is talking about is we were proposing putting floating docks at Stage Harbor adjacent to our float docks, attaching them to them. And the Coast Guard was going to dock their boats instead of Stage Harbor Marine. That bore out of an initiative that honestly goes back 20 years, where the Coast Guard has been trying to put their boats in government facilities as opposed to those controlled by private entities. It's closer to the harbor entrance that they need to get to. So we came up with this plan, and the select board has reviewed it twice, hasn't voted on it. They didn't vote no, but they didn't vote yes. They just didn't take a vote. Didn't take a vote. Okay. So we hope to go back to the select board with something maybe that's more palatable from a financial sense to them, because it would be nice to, as frustrating as that group is, I think it's important we keep a relationship with them as much as they want one. And hope to keep them here in the community. But that's kind of tempered with my earlier statement without being facetious, I'm not sure what their mission is that's left that isn't done by some other agency.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I'd hate to give them another excuse, but Norma, please.
I wonder how many of those persons realize that the Coast Guard, as we know it today, is an outgrowth of the life-saving service. That was why it was instituted in the early 1900s.
Exactly,
They've lost that use.
in the Humane Society. So it's, the pendulum swings, and I guess we're over towards the
The South China
Western
Sea.
Pacific and the South China Sea.
Yeah, Jason, please.
And as far as relations with the Coast Guard, it's an interesting point and one to bring up. That relationship lies more with the town than the Coast Guard as far as it's perceived, because the rotation rate is so high within the Coast Guard. I mean, since we've opened dialogue with them, we're on the 3rd District Admiral, I think the 2nd or 3rd Sector Commander, the 2nd officer in charge at the station. So by and large, they rotate, and it's almost passing it off to the next person. So, while, you might upset someone that's in that position now by taking a certain point or stance, that person leaves, and there's really not a memory on the Coast Guard side of the house as far as how those things go.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, further questions? If not, Andy?
Slowly changing my mind on this. But I just, one thing I was thinking I would plant in Stuart's head is, if this is a town-funded effort, and all those folks from Orleans and Harwich get into trouble on the bar, are we going to start charging for this? Maybe we should.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
it was an interesting concept that was brought up at the select board meeting. I'm going to have we have had some communications with our compatriots in Orleans and Harwich, certainly in Harwich, because they, the harbor master there is a retired commander and was the operations chief at Woods Hole, so he's very familiar and, in a similar frustration as we are with this decision. So we'll have those conversations. I don't know how those will go. I'm not even sure how that would be implemented, but nonetheless, interesting conversation.
Well, in a preview of our next topic, Orleans charges us for adult daycare, so maybe we can charge Orleans for daytime and nighttime rescues.
Yeah, I mean, if you got an Orleans morning sickness, sorry, you got to pay up.
All right, further questions? If not, I'll take a motion to support $250,000 to, I guess, serve essentially as earnest money in the face of an application for grant funding for
Yeah.
a 36-foot surfboat, specifications to be determined.
Well, it's a surf-capable vessel. It's our portion of the 75-25, 75 being the federal government, 25 being the local share.
Alex, anything to add to that?
No, that's about it. It's just, as Stuart mentioned, a grant share.
Okay. Is there a motion? Is there a motion? Second,
Second.
Barbara? Norma?
Yes.
Kristen?
Yes.
Tommy?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yes.
Joanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yep.
And the chair's in favor. You changed my mind. Good.
Okay.
Well done, gentlemen. Good luck. I think I do think, my personal view on this has not essentially changed, which is that we should have well-thought-out, considered policies in place in regards to this thing, its operation, its maintenance, its financing, its, to the extent they don't currently exist, sounds like much of that does, but if it doesn't, I would certainly hope that we would develop that, and I would certainly hope that we would get an operational financial assessment of what this is gonna cost us, best estimates on an annual basis.
Yeah, we'll pull all that together, and thanks for your support, and we'll keep you updated.
All right, appreciate that. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
All right, another audible, Norma?
Is there any way the town can send any communication, a letter or whatever, sensing from the town the displeasure with the system as it states now and the trepidation we might feel for any emergency that came up, if we wouldn't really know for sure who was going to take care of us?
I am going to direct that question to the harbor master and the assistant harbor master, who conveniently are standing in front of us.
I can, what I'll do is I'll send you, if you don't have it, I'll send you the correspondence between the select board and the Coast Guard, which clearly lays out the community's frustration with this. I mean, they were very succinct. The answers were less than succinct. But nonetheless, I'll send those copies to you, and you'll see it's pretty clear.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. That's the information that was contained in the select board package a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that'd be very helpful.
I'll send
Alex,
them
something
over.
like that?
I can provide that. I have that information, so I can get it to the Finance Committee. I just gave you Stuart's memo trying to be as brief as possible.
Great.
There is a lengthy history of correspondence, as Stuart alluded to, between these two entities, so.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to call another audible on our agenda and see if we can't leap to a vote on the Council on Aging, given the 4 minutes we have left. So we have some representatives of the COA in-house who have been waiting patiently, unless there are objections from members of the committee to that audible. There seemingly are none. Sorry, Norma?
You asking for objections? I'm
No,
sorry.
yeah, I'm wondering if anybody would object to moving
Oh,
the
no.
agenda around a little bit to accommodate a vote on the COA, which we announced on Tuesday we would be taking today.
I did get some information at the meeting, after the meeting last Tuesday, that I think would be worth sharing.
Do tell. Yes, please.
The meeting after the meeting is always the best meeting to listen to. And if you recall, last week when we were here, we were bombarded with warnings about a massive storm coming. And so there was a group sitting there or standing, and I was talking with them, and their question amounted to, what are we going to do? What about us? So I think that's a very valid question, because the persons in that group, primarily, as I know some of them, were women who were living by themselves. Some of them were in outlying areas where if the power went out, they would lose not only lights, but water and heat, toiletry, and cooking facilities. And they were frightened, rightly so. So I would like for us to re-examine the proposed Council on Aging building to include a responsible answer to their questions. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? And I would like to re-examine that building proposal to provide space to answer that question in an emergency. Where are we going to know? They need to have a place and know where they need to go that will provide cooking facilities, toileting, and safety. Thank you.
Okay, so I too had a meeting after the meeting. It was a much smaller meeting. It was an email correspondence with
What did the rest of us miss?
well, I'm about to tell you. No, I had an email input from Rick Pomeroy, the owner's project manager, on the project, who had just noted 4 or 5 follow-up things that were asked for at our meeting on Tuesday, and his position on the viability of providing information that was requested. One of them was the topic of making the new Council on Aging facility, and I forget what the term of art is, but more than a warming station, I guess a shelter, an overnight shelter that would provide beds and showers and cooking facilities and the like. And my understanding from his email was that is simply not going to happen. The building has been designed, the building has been proposed by the Board of Selectmen, the Select Board. We have an article that's going on the warrant next week for town meeting in early May. And it does not include having this facility be a designated emergency shelter, whatever the specific term of art is. To do so would require significant redesigning of the structure itself and a much more expensive facility. And one, my understanding from speaking to the fire chief is there's some questions around whether they could even staff it. Notwithstanding some of the public comments that were made at the meeting last week, my understanding is, to be blunt, that ship has sailed and is not. The best capabilities this town can offer are warming stations at the community center, and if there's need for services beyond that, there are some regional shelters that people can take advantage of. So that's my understanding of that situation. Alex, anything you'd like to add or amend to that?
No, I think your discussion earlier was that, this will have a generator, so it could be possibly used as a warming station, but again, as you just stated, not an emergency shelter.
So, Norma, please.
That is absurd.
Well,
These people who are going to need services are paying for that building. You know, it's the same as the community building. Somehow, for some reason, we decided that that's only for maybe 2 or 3 things. There's a whole big building there that could be used. And those women had a legitimate gripe. Where do we go? And I think to just dismiss it out of hand is not only folly, it's criminal. All the taxpayers
I'm
in
not, I'm
the,
not dismissing it out of hand. This is not the venue that's going to change the redesign of the building. My
hey, you do it all the time and you put an addition on your house. It's not a big deal.
Well, I think it's not as easy as I think you're describing it, but my suggestion would be if it's of that concern, I would take it to the select board. But knowing what we know, which is that we have the facts of the facts. We have a warrant article that's going on the warrant next week. It's going to be voted on at town meeting to build a building prospectively at 1610 Main Street that's not going to be an emergency shelter for this community. And if people are upset about that, then I guess they should vote no. But there's nothing that this committee can do at this point in time about that fact, as deplorable as it may be. Alex, please.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that, the emergency shelters that are available to Chatham residents is the regional emergency shelter. And I think, whether or not we can get people to those shelters, I don't know that answer. I think that that is a possibility. I don't know, but we can follow up and get those answers. Again, most of these emergency shelters are regional in nature, just because the staffing is very difficult and the services are available already in an existing building.
Okay. Joanne, and then I'm going to go to the audience, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, understandably, this article is as it's written, but I think we've made an important point along the way that we want generators at these buildings, and we want to provide at least some sort of shelter. Now, providing the more shelter that eventually we would really like to have, that's for future conversations, and we certainly can work on that. But I think we've made our point that we want to make sure that there are buildings in this town that will provide at least a warming place for our citizens in case of storms.
Thank you, Joanne. Leah, I think comment or question or something? Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Leah Lacrosse, Director of Community Services. I know that there's a lot of confusion between shelters and warming stations, and I want to add a point. So a warming station is just that. It's a place to come get warm, charge your cell phones, charge your computers, have a snack, that kind of thing. And we do provide that in town. We do it at the community center, and my plan is to do that at the new COA as well. To have it be a shelter, there is a whole set of policies that you must, a lot of policies and procedures that you must follow. One has to have a commercial kitchen. I realize that the design for this new building does, but it doesn't have dormitories or showers. And I understand your concern, but if it's a regional shelter, we don't run it. The region takes over, like Cape Cod Tech in Harwich, and they provide it. And they're having, with the regional shelters that they have right now, they're having difficulty staffing those. They're the ones that would staff it. We wouldn't staff it. And they can't staff, they're having difficulty staffing the ones they have now. So that would be a big impact. But we will certainly be open as a warming shelter, as a warming center, when and if this is built.
That's helpful. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there's no, let me rephrase that. If there are no other comments or questions, Tommy?
I think Dean wants to say something.
I was looking to see if Dean's hand's up, but I don't see it. No, Dean is shaking his head no. So Alex, the number I'm working with is to construct a COA at the 1610 Main Street location for a price of $10,419,852. Is that correct, please?
No, it's the larger amount because the select board voted the additional 2.5% contingency.
Oh, they did, okay.
So the amount is $10,667,944.
Okay. Up 2.5%, $10,667,944. I have a motion to support that spend for a new COA at 1610 Main Street.
So moved.
Mr. Chairman, there is a hand up, but it's not mine. I think it's Ms. Gibbs.
Oh, yes.
Okay, let me just get a motion in a second, then we'll ask for any further comments or questions. Was that Tracy? Was that a motion? Second?
Second.
Barbara? Okay, thank you. Any further comments and questions? Ms. Gibbs?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In terms of talking about a place in town for Chatham residents to go in the event of loss of communication and a warming station, I've been fighting for this for 2 years. It is not helpful to have something open just during the day. The key that what we need is something overnight in the event that what happened last year where we were without power for 6 days. People don't want to go down to Barnstable. Some of the shelters didn't open up. We got hit really, really badly, and we were without power for 6 days, and nobody knew what was going on because we had no communication. So this is not going to happen, obviously, for the Council on Aging. This is something that has to be, there are a lot of excuses why we can't do it, but there is no reason when we have a building that is warm at night with the heat and lights on, that they will not open the doors and let our people go there in the dead of night with children, whatever. They don't need showers. They don't need food. All they need to do is a place to get through the night. And this has been an ongoing battle with all kinds of excuses why we can't do it. So I don't believe that they will do that at the Council on Aging, but we don't need anything big, and it's just going to be for Chatham residents. And it's very frustrating and infuriating that when we've got a building that's warm, lights on, that they just don't unlock the doors and let us come in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, any further comments or questions? There being none, we have a motion and a second for a article to spend $10,667,944 on an SCOA facility over at 1610 Main Street. Norma? No. Kristen?
No.
Tommy?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yes.
Joanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And the chair's going to vote in favor. I am mostly impressed by the addition of the linkage to 193 Stony Hill Road, and I think that, for me, is the tipping point on this vote. Still have my reservations about 1610, its scale and scope, but the linkage to the affordable housing component, to me, is going to make a difference. So, chair votes yes. And that makes it 6-2. All right. Alex, I think we've run out of time.
The only thing is, I think Terry Whalen has been waiting patiently to
Okay.
discuss the terminal building easements obstruction article for $61,200. If we could
Okay, have you guys got the appetite
accommodate him?
and the ability to hang out for another 10 minutes or so? At least until 4. Well, we should be done before that. All right. Terry, I apologize for that. I did not see your little logo there on the screen. But we have a proposed article, capital article, Chatham Municipal Airport, fiscal year capital improvement plan, skinny down to $61,200. Terry, over to you, please.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Terry was a ventriloquist. Right. You're very welcome. Have a good afternoon.
It's been a pleasure to be served by you and to serve you.
For those of you who are not appreciating exactly what's going on, we just had somebody in the audience speak up when we were expecting Terry to talk out of the speaker, so it's a little disconcerting.
So I'm-
All right, Terry, let's try this again.
Terry, are you there? Yep, there he is.
You don't look like a thing like the person who just spoke.
No, and I apologize. I actually stepped out for one quick second and ran back in. So it was nothing that I hit. Sorry about that. Okay.
Okay, Terry, you're up. I think I provided a
Okay.
copy of the agenda report that you gave
Great.
to the select board for your meeting on Tuesday, as well as the draft article.
Great. So in that, essentially, the request before you is for the.
Terry, hold on for 1
some
second,
items-
please. Hey, guys, it's labeled 3C on the top right corner. It's capital article, Chatham Municipal Airport, federal fiscal year 2024 capital improvement plan, 3 pages long. 4 pages long. Give us just 1 sec, Terry.
Sure.
Everybody good? All right. Terry, over to you, please.
Yeah, okay, and again, so the title has changed. So that was originally submitted as a placeholder article for more robust projects in FY federal fiscal year 24 in the package you have, basically reduced down to 3 projects. If you look at the box, there was a red outlining on the 3 projects, and essentially these are for funds to match federal funding for projects related to obstruction clearing on airport property, permitting for airport property, and then also construction of a fence, if you're familiar with the former fisherman's storage area, that are eligible for federal Aviation Administration funding.
Okay, pretty straightforward. Any questions for Terry on the capital improvement plan for the airport FY '24? If I'm not mistaken, according to the memo, as with all of these projects, it's 90% federal funding, 5% state, 5% local. 3 projects identified, $61,200, runway obstruction removal, tree clearing on the airport, and fencing by the former fisherman's storage area, which has now been cleared and cleaned. Questions for Terry? Andy?
Briefly, these are all on airport property?
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
Further questions? If not, I'll take a motion to support the spending of $61,200 for the Chatham Municipal Airport. Norma, question, please.
One question only. Anything that is being removed or in any way changed, is it on any town property? Oh, excuse me, private property.
It's on airport property, which, is town-owned property that the Airport Commission manages.
But all of it, none of it will be on private property?
Correct. So the funding request
Thank you.
is all on airport property.
Okay, so motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
I mean, Barb's got the second. Should be Andy. Any further comments or questions? Norma, support?
Yeah.
Kristen?
Yes.
Tommy?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
Tracy?
Aye.
Joanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yep.
The chair votes yes, 8-0. All right, Terry, apologies again for not seeing your moniker there.
No, and I apologize as well, and thank you on behalf of the Airport Commission.
Very good, thank you. All right, Alex, anything you want to try to get into the next 2 minutes under the wire?
Yeah, it's, we're getting late here, so I'm not sure if you want to put these off, anything that's left remaining for Tuesday. We do have a meeting scheduled for Tuesday, which.
Yeah, we have some pretty important ones.
Yeah, we have.
I think left on our roster.
Yep.
So maybe rather than to give them short shrift, we just take the opportunity to postpone for the time being, given where we are on the clock.
Okay.
Yeah. Seems reasonable. Okay. With that, I'll then take a motion to adjourn. Second. So moved by an enthusiastic Norma. No, it's good. Exactly. We noticed. A second? Feet don't fail me now. Was there a second? Barbara's got the second. Norma, are you in favor of this?
Oh, yes.
Kristen?
Yes.
Tommy?
Yes.
Barb?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yep.
Joanne?
Yes.
Andy?
Yep.
Chair is in favor. All right, thank you guys, appreciate it as ever.
Thank you.